Hello and welcome, episode 3 of Wrestling Rebooked, putting wrestling into submission. On today's episode, we're going to be reviewing WWE Backlash, which happened just a couple of days ago. We're going to be having our finger on the pulse, we hope, again, taking a bit of an overview of the pay-per-view kind of theme and setup in wrestling as a whole at the moment, breaking things down and looking to rewrite our own history. And in our review, we're going to be looking at season 2 of Dark Side of the Ring, which has aired within the last month or two, and just going through the episodes. WrestlingRebooked@gmail.com, on Twitter @WRebooked, or hashtag WrestlingRebooked. Andeve, Backlash.
A weird pay-per-view. Some of it was absolutely fantastic, as I'm sure we'll outline, and some of it was really, really weird. Summed up a lot of what is wrong with WWE at the moment in some ways. Like, there's some really, really good bits, but the bits that were good tacitly imply, other areas where they're regularly going wrong. And I didn't see it straight away or live or anything, but a few friends did. And they said it felt a bit like the dying days of WCW. And when I watched it, that's how I felt about it as well, to be honest.
In what sense? So, in terms of the in-ring?
Yeah, it just felt a bit nonsensical, a bit farcical, a bit stupid. It looked like they didn't know exactly where they're going. It didn't feel like it had one coherent narrative or sense of the show. It was very bitty. So they were saying, it was just ludicrous in terms of storylines. And I think when you reflect on it overall, despite the fact there was a fantastic match on the card, some of the stuff that's interwoven throughout was really, really strange.
All right, we might as well start with the good bits, haven't we?
Yeah.
So the main event, Orton and Edge, which of course was the best wrestling match ever.
Yeah, the greatest wrestling match of all time.
Yeah.
Including the soundtrack.
Right, well, I mean, apart from the gimmick tagline, which is never always going to struggle to live up to the hype. Superb match, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was excellent. As good as match. I mean, we've been treated to Bryan and Styles on SmackDown, so obviously everyone was thinking, well, it'll never be as good as that. But it was actually fantastic. You're definitely right. It doesn't live up to the tagline. It didn't live up to the tagline, but I suppose it was never going to live up to the tagline, and that wasn't the point. But what it did do by calling it the greatest match ever is everyone was talking about it. There was a buzz around it, and both Orton and Edge, because they had that millstone around their neck, actually were forced into doing something that was fantastic. And you think about their previous match at WrestleMania and the stipulation there. Well, the stipulation this time worked far better. I think both competitors have loads and loads of credit. There's some decent little touches in there. Fink doing the announcing, a few callbacks to other people's special moves and things they've done before. It'd be hard for anyone to watch that and not think it was an excellent match. I'm sure you'd agree.
Mostly. I quite liked the throwbacks to other special moves, but I think better than that was you just got the feeling that they actually cared about the match. There was near falls, which you didn't know was going to go one way or the other. And so by definition, the outcome was unknown to some degree. Like, would Orton go over? That would make more sense considering he's currently on the roster. So it'd make more sense to put heat on him. Or actually, is this Edge going to be last match? Let's have him go out on a high. So by definition, you didn't really know which way it was going to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's such a simple thing, like when you have that.
Yeah, you felt like they were trying, like they were putting in effort. And that's not to suggest that wrestlers are ordinarily going out to the ring and just throwing away matches, but there was something about this that elevated their performance because of all the hype surrounding it, because of the nonsense of the tagline. And of course, it wasn't the greatest wrestling match ever, but it might well be the best match of the year so far.
Yeah.
So it worked really well. What do you think about the fact, though, that it wasn't a pure wrestling match in the sense that they stopped? They actually did the rebooking themselves, where they reshot bits and did adjustments as they went through and changed parts of it they weren't happy with.
Before I answer your question, I'm actually going to flip that back. Did you actually notice that?
No, I didn't notice it at all. The only thing afterwards is I saw a few clips of there's some times where Samoa Joe is on commentary and speaking, but actually his mouth is silent when the camera pans to him, which was quite funny. And obviously Edge got injured, and I'd seen in advance he was injured, although I hadn't seen the result or anything, and I was watching it thinking, well, when did he get injured? But apparently it was in one of the reshoots. But no, you definitely couldn't tell. I mean, I couldn't tell. I don't know, could you?
Yeah. So, I mean, and that's why I guess I would ask the question first. I absolutely didn't tell at all. And as a result, I didn't think it really affected the actual end result. And when I say end result, I mean the product as a whole rather than the actual result of the match. I didn't think it really was to the detriment of. Obviously, that's not going to work when you have an arena full of 15,000 people.
Yeah.
But in the current climate, and especially with, well, in Edge anyway, you've got someone who is ring rust at best. I didn't think it really mattered. It didn't really negatively affect it. I assume you think otherwise.
No. I agree with you. I think it didn't negatively affect it. But of course, what that does do is it places it on when you're thinking about the best matches this year, it's hard to compare it with Styles and Daniel Bryan because they went at it and had one take. I mean, I assume, or MJF and Jungle Boy, or whatever. Like they did it in one go, one take. Whereas actually, this is and I know we're going to talk about cinematic matches later. This is a version of a cinematic match. It's obviously much closer to a real match, but to some degree, it's cinematic, which takes away from the pure quality because obviously they're editing it, adjusting it. But nevertheless, what was it, 40, 50 minutes? It was pretty good to watch throughout that entire time.
Yeah, it's 40 minutes. Fair point. Fair point. It does detract from the natural flow of a match. Like if you compare it to matches in history that are considered great wrestling matches, the flow and the narrative of the storyline that comes through in Flair Steamboat or Brett and Austin or whoever you care to mention, Angle and Michaels, like it's because of the flow of the match that seeps from one segment to the next.
Yeah, you're not really comparing like with like if you're comparing a recorded match versus the pure live ones they do. But nevertheless, that doesn't take away from the fact it was really, really enjoyable. Actually, it was excellent to watch. But of course, it leaves you asking the question: if you're treated to Bryan and Styles on Friday, and on Sunday you get a match like Edge and Orton, why is that not happening? Why is that not happening more often? Why are we not seeing those great matches? Because all these stars now have come through NXT. We've seen the brilliance and the indie scene and Pro Wrestling Guerrilla and stuff. We've seen the brilliance they can offer. So why are these matches? Why are we so surprised that there's a really decent match headlining a pay-per-view? And that's a sort of underlying question there.
Yeah. Would you want A-star matches though through your whole PPV? Has that ever happened?
No, but just in the sense that there's so much that's throwaway on WWE TV at the moment where you just sat on the fast forwards. Actually, it doesn't have to be a 5-star match, but every match should have some sort of way that people are drawn into it, engaged with it, and invested in it. And I think most of the stuff and we'll see it on the same card, is just not invested in the same way. I guess the last thing I'd add is that if you're being really hypercritical, and it's hard to be when a match was that good, it's on the top of the card with Edge in his third match, if you include the Rumble in 11 years, main eventing. And if you the follow-up on Raw had Christian, who is 46, 47 and retired, being done over by Ric Flair. So while some of that is very, very good, I think some of the follow-up WWE is still lacking slightly.
Christian is 46.
Yeah, 46. I'm retired, I think, 2014. So suddenly, and I know it was a throwaway segment, but you got Ric Flair, who's 61, turning it. It's just gone back to the nonsense again. And I know that Edge is obviously injured, but still, the company booking there is not as good as it could have been.
I think the Raw segment is a bit of a tangent, isn't it? Because Christian just took a bump and that was the end of it. The rest of it was just, total fuss as far as booking is concerned.
Yeah.
But to go back to the Backlash, should it even be the main event?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. This is a view that fine, and I can understand the other side of the coin. But surely you should be building your product around titles and championships. Surely that's the pinnacle of the business. And I think when you've got 2 title matches on the card, one is halfway down the card, then it really devalues the titles. It really makes them not worthwhile, and then it forces WWE into these nonsense storylines that they have to develop. I don't think it should have been the main event. I think it should have been further down the card, despite how good it was. And that's just a personal feeling that I think titles should close matches. Close pay-per-views.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it was clear to see, though, that from the get-go, that all of the marketing and creative and effort was going into that main event, and really the rest of the show was total throwaway. Yeah,
which is fine. If that's building up Orton there and then. But what does it do in the longer term for the other titles, for the 5 other competitors for some reason competing in those matches? I mean, like thinking about McIntyre and Lashley, I actually thought it was a pretty good match, and obviously not in terms of mat wrestling and the clinic and that sort of stuff, but in terms of, I was interested in both those characters. I think they're both monsters. They look good. They have a legitimacy. There was a time when they were exchanging spine busters. You felt that I could feel the TV shaking. I thought the end was a bit frail, of course, with Lana's involvement. I don't know why that she's been involved with Lashley at all, but I actually thought that was a really good main event. And you know, for the credibility of both of them, if they're main eventing successive pay-per-views for the title and going back and forth, I think that would be a really, really good program. But you know, it's just lower down the card. I'm not sure why.
So just linking it back to the Edge Orton then, and just thinking back to WrestleMania headline and previous WrestleManias gone by, do you think Vince trusts some of the younger talent to actually deliver on the big stage?
That's a good question. I mean, perhaps not, but equally, he's playing a sort of zero-sums game where he elevates talent quickly, like Ricochet and Aleister Black, and then they just meander around in the mid-card and don't get to Ricochet. Come on, he was excellent in New Japan, and he put on great shows in NXT. They chucked him straight up to the main card. Now where is he?
Yeah.
Where is he? So yeah, maybe he doesn't trust the talent, but you know, Lashley's been around. His last attempt was 13 years ago. McIntyre's on the title, so you're going to put those two in a title match, put them in the main event, and also let them wrestle a series of matches rather than one-offs where there's these false finishes and these rubbish endings. Yeah. And that's the title probably he seems to have cared more about, because the Strowman Universal title match, which I think was even further down the card, was a joke.
Yeah. So I think the McIntyre-Lashley match was actually all right for what it was, maybe a little bit too long. That was my initial thought, and then read it in the dirt sheets and thought, great, someone agrees with me.
Yeah.
I think for the first 5 or 6 minutes, almost like similar to like a Lesnar Reigns match. It's decent for the first maybe 10 minutes tops if we're pushing it. But if it does go any longer, they just sort of amble around for quite a bit, because they're both ultimately like power wrestlers, especially Lashley anyway.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
But I thought the match was all right for what it was. But who really ever thought that Lashley was a credible title contender? Like, did you really think he was going to go over there?
Whose fault is that? Obviously he's not very good to talk about. Everything else about him is very good. If you put him in nonsense storylines with Lana and that, then of course he lacks some credibility. But that's why I think with this McIntyre and Lashley stuff, and it looks like it with how Raw and it's going to continue, if you let them go back and forth and let them have, more than two, 3 or 4 matches together, and actually, if McIntyre's going to win and keep the title, fine, but then Lashley emerges the stronger for having been in that program, and that's where he gets his credibility from. He's a legitimate fighter. He's got a legitimate MMA background, successful, looks amazing. MVP's doing a good chat with him. Maybe he's not ready for the title. Maybe you can put the title on, especially with no crowds. But I think Vince should be trusting him, really, and trusting those two to have a series of good matches and make some new main event stars with them.
To your point, Randy Orton versus Edge, 44 minutes and 45 seconds. Yeah. Drew McIntyre versus Bobby Lashley, 13 minutes and 15 seconds.
Yeah, yeah. And fair enough, because that was supposed to be the greatest wrestling match ever, and all that sort of stuff. But the match at WrestleMania was 38, 39 minutes, nearly 40 minutes. So Edge has come back and wrestled two 40-minute matches towards the tops of the cards.
Yeah.
That's a lot of, and he's a fantastic star. He's one of my favourites, but that's a lot to expect him to carry. And especially when you've got all this talent elsewhere that's sort of pushed down the card, and you're devaluing those talents and you're devaluing the titles. And then Vince will complain, well, hold on, I haven't got any, no one cares about the titles, I haven't got any decent talent, but he's setting that program up.
Yeah.
Look at the Universal title. Strowman has lost any momentum he ever had. This guy was white hot in terms of, for years, in terms of the support he had when he was going back and forth with Reigns, when he's smashing people at the Elimination Chamber. Miz and Morrison have been made to look a joke in that as well. They didn't come across, they were booked like the B team. They didn't come across credible. You didn't think they were going to get any moves in. Is that why Morrison came back to WWE, to be second fiddle in that sort of situation? Like, where's Wyatt? Just disappeared, not really mentioned. So in that situation, credibility for the title, credibility for Strowman, credibility for Miz and Morrison, credibility for the program is all lost, because you're making everything feel like it's a bit joke and throwaway. And that's why then it's also fourth or fifth down the card. When Wyatt comes back into the picture, that then is also a reduced program, because he's just disappeared. No one knows why. Strowman hasn't been made to look strong. He hasn't had decent matches. I can't even really remember what happened in that match between them. So I just thought that there exemplifies me saying, does Vince trust the talent? Does Vince just trust any talent to be allowed to do stuff properly?
All right. So Strowman versus Miz and Morrison, while we're at it, 7 minutes and 20 seconds. But I think if you're like summarizing all of this stuff, I actually think McIntyre's been a decent champion in the current climate, like in the current circumstances, to like be given the belt when it was going on Reigns anyway. He's done pretty well. How are we rebooking this?
So that's a great question. I think the titles have to mean something. Otherwise, what is the point? So the titles need to be in the main event, or need to be further up the card.
You mean the last match on the card?
Yeah, exactly. The last match on the card. All right, if you have to have a filler between the two of them, you can have some sort of. We used to have Brodus Clay doing some dancing or something in between or whatever. But I would have those as the main events. I think I'd Lashley and McIntyre. Maybe I think you're right. Maybe a little bit shorter, and even let them hit each other a little bit harder, and then make sure that that's got a follow-up program. I think with Strowman, Miz and Morrison, either Miz and Morrison are a credible threat, and so everyone comes out of that looking better, or if they're just going to be treated as a joke, don't have them in that. And you've just had a SmackDown tournament, a tournament for the Intercontinental title. Why not have something where Corbin and a few others are messing around to try and get in against Strowman, rather than a just throwaway match, which looks exactly what it was, a placeholder halfway down the card?
Yeah, so I think for me, the WWE title with McIntyre is fine. I think the program with Lashley is fine, as you've already alluded to. Like, Lana just doesn't need to be in that picture at all. I'm not quite sure what the creative direction is with her, whether she's being phased out or what. There was a piece on Raw with her and Natalia, which was kind of hinted at, but whether that happens will be seen. But I digress. I think that it's actually fine for what it is. There isn't actually a massive amount of options. The only other option, which I'm sure they're going to go back to eventually, will be Rollins, Monday Night Messiah, to come back into that picture. But he's got other stuff going on with the Rey Mysterio feud.
Yeah, which is quite a good storyline, actually.
Yeah. But as for the Universal title, like, it's been cold since Strowman's had it. Let's be honest.
Yeah, but even before when Wyatt had the Universal title, didn't he? And he lost to Goldberg in Saudi Arabia. Just take that sentence and realize how ridiculous it is. And since then, they've been on the back pedal. So they just sort that out.
Miz and Morrison are actually decent athletes, decent wrestlers.
Of course, Morrison's fantastic.
Yeah.
Miz, all those Intercontinental title reigns, the stuff he was doing with Daniel Bryan, the stuff he was doing with Shane. Miz is excellent.
Yeah.
And Morrison's a really great athlete. But they're just thrown into that. And they've given it their best, but it's just thrown in that to be jokers. It's stupid. Yeah.
Okay, Asuka and Nia Jax.
Yeah,
Women's title.
yeah. So the women's across the card, I just thought it was a bit underwhelming, really. Nia Jax, she's just always nervous. There's a moment where she slammed Asuka, and you thought that's a potential problem. Not really sure why Jax, of all the people they've got, is in that position. I think you'd probably agree with that as well, wouldn't you? And then the tag match, the triple threat tag match to start the show, I don't know why, it just didn't really work for me. It didn't really look like it flowed. The moves looked really staccato, like they hadn't really worked together. So the women's stuff on the show I thought was pretty lame, considering when you think about what the women have to offer, actually. It's almost surprising I'd say this because it's taken me a while to get there, but it's actually really, the actual quality of stuff across the women's in terms of individuals and that, even without Lynch, is fantastic. But I found the stuff on the show a bit underwhelming.
How are you rebooking the Asuka match?
Let's take Jax out, maybe. But I mean, there's loads of others around, isn't there?
Yeah.
Natalia, where are people like Ruby Riott?
Shayna Baszler.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, just take Jax out of that.
I think you can't foresee necessarily the Becky situation, but there was an opportunity before Becky stopped wrestling, and when Shayna Baszler first came up to NXT, they could have put the belt on her then when she was white hot, and that would have been the time to really. Maybe it's all hindsight now, but that would have been a great opportunity to hand over that title reign, which had gone on for so long.
Yeah.
To her, for someone that was up and coming, is kind of seen as a legit fighter, has a decent look, is decent in the ring.
The worry is obviously, you know what's happening with Banks and Bayley. Bliss obviously is not on a singles run at the moment. Asuka has the title. You've got a few that are feuding down in NXT, but the worry is, as much as I think she's fantastic, Charlotte doesn't have a belt anymore. Charlotte's not on the pay-per-view. Are they just waiting for Asuka Charlotte at SummerSlam? And is everything else just obviously a placeholder until then?
Looks that way, doesn't it?
Yeah. Like if you're rebooking, really, Charlotte should be in and around that feud, but she's very much in danger of being overexposed despite how fantastic she is.
In danger. I think there was a period for the last few weeks where she's been on all three brands, having matches on all three brands.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah.
Nia Jax is just an absolute travesty, isn't she? Like, it's a bit of a shame, really, because it's probably nothing personal, but some of her in-ring stuff is just so rusty. Obviously, she can't help her size or whatever.
Well, the thing is that should be a positive, her size, and that should be how she's used. But that actually, it's almost as though she has to wrestle the same way as the Four Horsewomen are wrestling.
Yeah,
that's not what she has to do. She needs to make that. So I thought for me, the women's had really gone downhill. The only other match on the cards that we're left with then is Sheamus and Hardy.
Yep.
I don't have much to say about that match. Sort of fine for what it was, but I'm never going to watch it again.
What do you think of the storyline involving Jeff and his kind of real life misdemeanors?
Yeah. I can see why it's a problem making someone's addiction a storyline. But I assume Jeff signed it off and agreed, although I don't know how he could not, could he really turn around and say, no, Vince, we're not doing that? There were a few moments on SmackDown when they were chatting where he said, I'm an addict and I'm sorry for what I've done, friends and family. I wonder if that reaches across the divide and actually people watch and think, that's a positive role model. Although then it's a bit weird that he's throwing that urine and then losing that match and stuff like that. So I'm sort of on the fence with it. I suppose in the same way the greatest wrestling match ever tagline is a silly tagline but does some stuff. You could question this moralistically, should they be doing it? But actually, it makes you interested in the match and there was a bit of suspense. And I reckon probably Sheamus isn't the one that set up Jeff Hardy. There's someone else involved. So maybe going forward it's okay. But I can see why the storyline is a bit controversial and sometimes it's hard to watch.
The storyline's going to loop back round at some point, isn't it? Because Elias was involved, so at some point he'll come back.
Right, of course, yeah. And didn't Sheamus say Hardy said, or someone said, someone with a ginger beard did it, and obviously you'd think it's Sheamus, but could be Strowman, could be Sami Zayn. But so if they do stuff like that and they get it right, at least they're trying to do something different. And it's obviously not like WWE not to use real life stuff, like they did with Edge and Matt Hardy, or the Road Warriors and alcoholics. Even Paul Bearer, when he died, that's not funny, but when he died, it hits CM Punk and The Undertaker was sort of almost feuding over the urn. CM Punk was throwing his ashes everywhere. So WWE does those storylines. You can see why they're problematic, but I suppose if they interest you in the match, then they've done their job.
I think the only last thing to say on that is it's quite hard to invest in Hardy. Again, going similar to the point you made about Edge and his age and the point of the career is both those guys are in that ladder match at WrestleMania 17. Nearly 20 years ago. So that you're not exactly in their prime. And Sheamus has been out for a long time. So it presents two problems, two guys with not a lot of momentum and two guys with a lot of ring rust. I thought the match actually was okay for what it was, but like from a fan's perspective, it's quite hard to invest in it when you've got two guys that are not exactly at the peak of their powers. It sort of might work with Edge because he's been with Orton, but
it does feel like they don't have much to do, so you put them together and we'll do a sort of controversial, sensational storyline around them. But you have to have a few of those things on the card, and criticizing WWE for not investing in titles and proper storylines. Actually, they are trying a storyline there. Some of it lands, some of it doesn't. Hardy and Sheamus are okay. Probably struggling because there's no crowd, which makes it worse for them too, because people aren't sort of engaging what they're doing in Hardy's high flying antics. But that wasn't the worst thing on the card for me.
Yeah, we all know where that title goes.
Yeah, I don't know if you've even have you had a chance to even watch it through yet and go back and see it all.
Are you referring to Street Profits, the Viking?
The Viking Raiders, Street Profits. That was supposed to be a tag team match, but I mean, maybe it's a triple threat because all those ninjas. I mean, I think outside of Goldberg, what he's done in the ring recently, that's got to be, maybe even including that has got to be the worst thing I've ever seen in WWE. I don't understand why that is going. Like, why is that going on? They throwing bowling balls into people's private parts, turning up with axes and shields. And I think the worst bit for me was when one of the Viking Raiders shot his hand out and through telekinesis pulled some chicken into his hand as though he was Luke Skywalker in Star Wars. That was absolutely terrible. And who can be signing that off? Heyman's gone, right? Heyman's gone. So Vince and Pritchard are signing that off. And it's the sort of thing that makes you embarrassed to watch wrestling.
Michael Hayes not on creative still.
Surely he hasn't signed that off. But because, when wrestling obviously has a bit of a stigma, but if you show people Ciampa Gargano or Cole Gargano or, Kevin Owens and Rollins doing their stuff, and you put it together with a good production, decent storylines, and the quality of moves and stuff they can do, people surely have to watch that and go, okay, well, it's not, even if it's not my bag, I can see why that's quality. But who is that match aimed at? Like, that's a genuine question. I know we're a bit older. Our 10-year-olds watching that match thinking, oh, that's fantastic. What's the purpose? Like, where is it going? Both those teams were excellent. Profits doing their backstage stuff. Viking Raiders, when they were War Machine, it's destroyed both teams. I actually know people, but a few people turned off after that match because they couldn't watch the main event because they just seen how ridiculous it was. What were those ninjas doing in there? And the ninjas, not only did they turn up, one of them's about 7'5", but also then Big Show has turned up again on Raw to go against the ninjas. So it was absolutely abysmal. It's the worst thing in a list of worst things at a time of lots of worst things that the WWE could have possibly have done. People actually, when you say it looks like WCW, that is the hallmark of the ship that sank that was WCW at the end. And people who want to watch wrestling, who are actually on the product, on the pay-per-view, turning off because they've seen that, it just shows you how awful it is. It's rubbish.
Do you want to have a breath there?
Yeah, mate. Just terrible. Absolutely terrible. I can't be persuaded of another view. Can you?
So what if we play devil's advocate here and actually that match was just a vehicle to introduce this 7-foot monster that obviously Vince is going to be all over, who then turned up on Raw and had a match, don't forget.
Well, I mean, he's from the Performance Center, and he has been trying to say, I mean, obviously, it's not just Shaquille O'Neal stand up, but still, that means that whole segment was throwaway and rubbish. What does it do for the Profits and the War Raiders? Why
they're already over, aren't they? That's the point.
Do you think so? Like War Machine?
Well, I'm just, from creative's perspective.
I mean, yeah. Well, I'd struggle to see how they're over. They destroyed War Machine, and then the best thing you can do is bring back the Big Show to team with them against 5 faceless ninjas. I just can't get behind it. Never mind the stuff like they're not even characters with. That sounds a bit stupid, but they're not even like Undertaker and Kane who have some sort of supernatural power. He's just put his hand out, and he's called back to some chicken, and it's just shot into his hand, and he's eating it. I mean, that is ridiculous. That's not. You don't even see that on the Cartoon Network, and all the sort of moments where they were just flashing back to other stuff, and then before he bowls the ball into his nuts, he thinks back to when he was bowling in the alley. It was terrible. It was supposed to be a tag title match. Rubbish. Absolute rubbish.
Should we move on?
Yeah, that's it. So Backlash Rebooked, what are you saying?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think it was that bad a show. I didn't think it was that bad. Enjoy the main event. Keep it as it was.
Yep.
McIntyre a bit shorter.
Yeah.
There isn't Ms. Morrison. Have a legit contender, whoever that may be. And I'm happy.
Yeah, fair enough. And get rid of that Profits match.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, fantastic. That's a given. Yeah, fine. And then Sheamus and Hardy, very decent for what it was. Women's, like they can do better, but yeah, I suppose it is a BC level pay-per-view. So yeah, it was all right. Yeah.
Shall we?
Yeah, move on.
Okay, section 2, episode 3, Wrestling Rebooked, putting wrestling into submission. All right, time to put our finger on the pulse, and today we're going to be taking a look at some of the PPVs that have happened over the last few weeks, including Backlash, which of course we've already talked about, but also NXT have just had another episode of their Takeover in Your House, throwback to the kind of mid to late 90s shows. We've also had AEW, All Elite Wrestling's Double or Nothing, which is their annual equivalent to WrestleMania. I'm not sure whether they'd like that kind of tagline, but that's effectively what it's become. And we've broken down and just had a look at individual pieces of those shows to just kind of bring together the best bits of each to try and formulate what we think might be an ideal PPV at this time. So production, fans, storylines, cinematics, and in-ring product are our 5 criteria that we're looking at. So production, Andeve.
Yeah. So you've got to think the pay-per-views are what the business is built around and builds to. It's where the stories climax. It's where the change of titles. It's what the companies put their emphasis on. So that's where you'd expect the pinnacle to be. And across those 3 pay-per-views that you've talked about, I think if you amalgamate aspects of them, you get to a really, really good place. I don't think anyone's doing it particularly well at the moment. But in terms of production, AEW Double or Nothing, I think the set was really, really good. That was the first AEW pay-per-view because of the COVID era, and they made it feel large and grand and important, a bit of a spectacle. You know, the Titantron, the entrance, and the ramp and the ring approach all looked valuable. All had an aspect of grandeur to them. And WWE, to start with, in the Performance Center, it just wasn't doing that. It almost gone the other way, as in, you're in the Performance Center, go and just get down there and go, and sort of hadn't made that effort. And AEW was the first pay-per-view where we'd seen during the era, actually, there's still a grand stage here, and there's still, you know, all the pyrotechnics and the excitement that you normally associate with a pay-per-view. And actually, WWE has obviously taken lead from that, because what they did within your house, actually, the set for that was really decent as well. So given the fact there's a lack of stadium and arenas and fans, I think it's really important that you get that set right to make it intriguing and engaging. And I think AEW has done that best, but I think WWE is now following suit, especially with what they did within your house.
Fair enough. Yeah, I've said before on previous podcasts, I think that the AEW set just looks a little bit more aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah.
Where they've got those kind of circular entrances, the big screen above it, the walkway down to the ring. Maybe it's just because they've got that massive set, haven't they, down in Florida, that they got that big open space that they can use.
But it certainly looks brighter and shinier than it did when you looked at WrestleMania, and it looked like it was just a sort of a backyard local wrestling match.
Of course, the Performance Center is indoor as well, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. That's a good point, actually. So the outdoors of AEW as well, yeah.
And it looks like they film like late afternoon, evening.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that helps. But I agree. Like, obviously the early days of the pandemic, when they literally had no one, and you could hear the echoes of the voices in the ring, was
which brings us to the second point already, about the fact that having no fans, it's not a lot they can do. There's not a lot you can do. But AEW has got it better at the moment. They've got the wrestlers at ringside, and the wrestlers are in there, not there as fans and characters, so you can sort of hear them shouting their own stuff, or see Jimmy Havoc acting like Jimmy Havoc at ringside. And that actually really works. I think it really works for, if you're watching, you're also then intrigued and drawn in by what's going on. But I think it actually elevates it for the wrestlers in the ring as well, you know, to have their peers watching as their peers. WWE has tried to follow suit with having Performance Center recruits.
Not quite the same though, is it?
No, behind the glass is quite dulling. And also, I think they're trying to get them to act like fans rather than themselves.
They're being told, you know, boo this guy, cheer this guy.
Yeah, which is not how wrestling works, right? There's no organic nature to it. So I think in the Edge match, I don't know if this was dubbed over or if they're actually saying it, but there was a "Fight Forever" chant, and it just sounded absolutely nauseating, really. And so what I think it's good to have those people at ringside, but just you know, they don't need to be doing all the other stuff.
You're right there.
Yeah, mate. Just drop the mic.
So I would mostly agree. I think what actually AEW have gone a step further and had, I think on Dynamite this last week, they had Billy Gunn at ringside, and they had him on one side of the barriers, MJF on the other, and they had Billy Gunn interrupt MJF whilst he was cutting his promo. And that then set up a feud and eventually a match that they're going to have next week. Yeah. So they're sort of going a step further. Not only are they having their talent in gimmick at ringside, they're now submerging it with the actual storylines themselves.
Yeah, which makes sense. So they're responding to the context and the circumstances, as they have been throughout, really, much better than WWE is.
Yeah.
WWE is doing the tasks. We need to get people at ringside for an atmosphere, but they're missing the point.
Yeah.
So I think that improves the pay-per-views. And so the next bit in terms of storyline, then, you know, this is a bit obvious, really. But when they've got meaningful storylines, and you look at Edge, Orton, MJF and Jungle Boy, Moxley and Lee, Lashley and McIntyre, the women's triple threat in your house, built around the belts, which I'm going to harp on about that, but, you know, whether they mean something, you get the balance. Essentially, you know, you get the balance right there, and the matches are really good. It doesn't matter whether there's a crowd or not. Daniel Bryan and Stars, I know that wasn't a pay-per-view, but Edge, Orton, people are watching, they're interested, and they're excellent. So I think just because it's a totally different environment, and essentially it is a reduced environment compared to what they're used to, they should still be investing in decent storylines that lead into those matches, and just get that balance. Essentially, you know, what you've got now is is acoustic gigs rather than big stadium gigs. So you just need to respond to that environment and allow people to wrestle. And it must be the case that these wrestlers are used to it, because they've come up through the indie scene where they're wrestling in front of smaller crowds and stuff. So more meaningful storylines that build into these matches makes for a more effective pay-per-view. And that's just that. But that's just how that's got nothing to do with COVID. That's just how it's always been. They just need to not negate on that because of COVID.
So hold on. So how do you think the NXT in your house storylines lacked any real structure, interest?
So the main event certainly didn't, and that was maybe the best match of the year. Was certainly the match of the year contender for the women's title. There was clear flow and focus around that.
Charlotte and Rhea Ripley.
Yeah.
Io Shirai.
Yeah, that's it. The triple threat. So just building some decent story. Edge and Orton had a decent storyline. Moxley and Lee had a decent storyline. Where the matches were less effective is where Gargano was just fighting Lee for some reason, and it didn't really work. So yeah, just it's as old as wrestling is, building decent storylines and get people invested in what's happening, and that makes for decent pay-per-views.
Yeah. I think worse than that was the Adam Cole Velveteen Dream match, another cinematic.
Yeah,
backlot brawl that wasn't in a backlot brawl at all, and it looked terrible.
So that for me, you're absolutely right. That's the biggest thing that I just implore them not to do. I know that they have to respond to circumstances, and I know they have to do some things differently. But if you're talking about cinematic matches, and I know Edge Orton is on the continuum of cinematic matches, but you've had the Boneyard, the Firefly, Funhouse, Ciampa Gargano, the Money in the Bank ladder match, the Dream match with Adam Cole. You're just talking about Adam Cole and Dream
Street
match.
Profits.
Yeah, and the Street Profits match, like Stadium Stampede as well, which probably was the best of the lot, but still, they just need to stop these cinematic matches. They're awful. They're awful. The Firefly Funhouse, look, that's a promo, not a match. The Boneyard, okay, maybe we'll take one match because it's Undertaker and it's a different approach. But all the rest of them have been poor, woeful, the worst thing you've ever seen, depending which one you're talking about. So, look, it's no coincidence, is it, that the one that was really actually quite good, the cinematic match that was really quite good, was Edge and Orton. And the reason it was really quite good is because it didn't try and be a cinematic match. It just tried to be a wrestling match and then tried to, turn up the volume to make it a bit better. It actually, like you said, we couldn't tell when we were watching that it wasn't shot one way through. So, essentially we're saying, let people wrestle in a ring. And if you want to record it or pre-record it like Cole and Dream, fine, but have them in a ring and have them do some stuff around. Don't have them thrown into parking meters and all that sort of nonsense. I just think the cinematic matches for me have not worked at all.
I think you're quite clear on your opinion there. So in an era where cinematic matches probably aren't going to go away, how are you going to rebook that?
I would just focus on the positives of Edge and Orton and use that as your template. So let's think about Adam Cole and Velveteen Dream. Those two can wrestle. Okay, you don't want to have it in the performance center all the time. You want to have it with some cars around it and all that sort of stuff. Great. Have a ring. Get 8 cars around it. Have some lighting up above. Let them wrestle and let them use the environment and do some, moves on the car or whatever. But let's not move it totally away from the ring so that they're just in some sort of D-level horror movie chase.
Would you still have Roderick and Strong piled off in a van?
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Adam Cole dropped a tweet the next day on Twitter, obviously, because that's where he dropped tweets. Said, they got back safe this morning. They're a little bit shaken, but they're okay. I mean, let's staying in kayfabe and staying in character. Not breaking kayfabe, but I mean, yeah, fine. You're trying a storyline, but it's got to be a bit. There's got to be some sense of normality to it. So I would. The question you ask yourself is: are those cinematic matches better than if they weren't cinematic matches? That's what you're ultimately asking. And maybe the Boneyard is, but aside from that, were they? Are they? Stampede? I don't know if Jericho's just convinced me with his enthusiasm, but the rest of them, no.
Hopefully Roderick and Strong don't get travel sickness. Right, so that leaves just a fifth and final as in our criteria of in-ring.
Yeah. What would you say about that?
Well, I think there is a difference between what you see in AEW versus anything on WWE products, NXT or otherwise. Some of the let's put Nia Jax to one side, but most of the WWE talent, I just think work a lot cleaner. And go a step further, even guys that have come from WWE, so Jericho, Swagger, or Jake Hager, Matt Hardy, they just look a lot cleaner, a lot more fluent in the ring than some of the guys which have basically just come off the indie circuit.
Yeah.
If you actually look at like the Inner Circle, you've got Ortiz and Santana. I actually think their gimmick's pretty good, and I think they look the part and talk the part. But when you actually watch them in ring, and you actually watch them even in the Stampede match, a lot of their work they're doing is shoddy. It's a lot of moves missed, and I can only put that down to WWE having a better infrastructure, being better coaches, having better facilities, and a better history, essentially, of being able to pull and put together athletes to be able to do this stuff in the ring. AEW, which are on record of doing most stuff on the fly in terms of their booking or whatever, are essentially relying on Jericho and others and Matt Hardy, for example, Arn Anderson, who have a history of pro wrestling versus indie guys.
Yeah. And it's different, obviously, having a few good matches every so often versus running a weekly show with storylines developing and changing in the interplay. Yeah.
I think they've landed on their feet with MJF.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they've got some talent in there. You know, Cody Rhodes, Revival have turned up. Got the Young Bucks.
Yeah, but there's two WWE guys.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So what you're saying there that just the quality of the in-ring match needs to be better than we've seen in the last few months as well. Yeah.
Since existence, really.
Since when?
Existence, since AEW is formed.
Right, okay, yeah, fair enough. That's about a year, isn't it?
They've now chucked in, I know this is maybe on a slight tangent from a creative standpoint, but they've now chucked in this bodybuilder guy with Moxley. What sort of match is that going to be? Yeah,
of course. Yeah, that's right, because he won the ladder match, didn't he? He's gone straight into the main event. They're probably suffering from a lack of talent in terms of depth, maybe. Yeah. Whereas WWE is the reverse in that it's got so many people that they don't know how to weave all these stories together and effectively give lots of people so they got their right sort of positions and shots. But yeah, I mean, essentially what we're saying there across those 5 criteria, isn't it, is let people wrestle and make it a memorable event, and everyone should be able to do that, shouldn't they? Jim Ross, Jake Snake, Arn Anderson, Jericho, all on one promotion. You've got Triple H, Michaels and that doing NXT. The problem is Vince and Pritchard maybe at the main roster of WWE, but they should be able to make a show where people wrestle and the event is memorable, because that's what wrestling is.
Don't forget Shivani at AEW.
Of course, yeah, our friend.
Should we move on?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so good. Some decent stuff out there, but they just need to consolidate it to make it better, more effective.
All right. Okay, part 3, episode 3, Wrestling Rebooked, putting wrestling into submission. Dark Side of the Ring, season 2. Has been doing the rounds over the last couple of months, 10 episodes, so longer than season 1. Any standout episodes for you?
There's a few standout episodes. Obviously, the 2 biggest episodes in terms of interest. You know, in the first series they had Montreal, and anything about Montreal you're always interested in. This series they had the Benoit tragedy. Actually, the first episode was Benoit and Guerrero. Really spent a lot of time talking about Guerrero as well. So Benoit, Guerrero tragedies, and obviously they ended it with the Owen Hart tragedy. So they're both compelling viewing, and I think they were compelling viewing for a number of reasons. But yeah, they were really, really good. I also enjoyed the New Jack and Brawl for All episodes and the David Schultz episode as well. I thought they were the best 5, which is about half of them.
Okay.
I thought the others were not quite as good.
I guess we get to New Jack in a bit, but I just wondered why the Benoit Owen Hart, for example, episodes. What would be your reasons for why that made such compelling viewing?
I mean, they're massive, massive tragedies, right? They're massive, massive tragedies. I've taken them separately. I guess both of them died young, and there's a big problem in wrestling, obviously, with wrestlers dying underage. If you're 3 times more likely to die under 65 as a wrestler than the rest of the American male population. So there's a big interest there, and especially with the way their lives unfortunately ended. With Benoit and Eddie as well, WrestleMania 20, they both celebrate as it goes off the air. 18 months later, Eddie's dead, under 40. And then 18 months after that, Benoit's dead. And it's never really been resolved. It's never, no one's ever really got to the bottom of it. And the fact that there were so many people talking on the Benoit Guerrero program, you had Eddie's family, you had Benoit's family, you had other people. Jericho, I think, was on it with really good knowledge of the business and what was happening and working around that time. It was just really, really riveting, if that's the right word, given the tragedy. Riveting watch.
Yeah, well, Jericho contributes and narrates it, doesn't he? So
yeah.
But I'd agree. So I think we probably have slightly different perspectives, given at that point you were probably more submerged in that period of wrestling than I was.
Yeah.
So it's interesting for me to watch back and so kind of learn the build up, even though I knew the actual tragedy itself, but the actual build up and what was going on in his life at the time.
Yes, Benoit's, you mean?
Benoit's, yeah. And just from a kind of TV documentary standpoint, I think the fact that they took a little bit longer and cut it over 2 episodes gave it a little bit more of a meaning and a little bit more sort of purpose to watch, as opposed to the rest of the series.
Yeah.
They kind of like took their time with it a bit more.
Yeah, and I suppose they're both huge names. They're both world title winners, both considered amongst the best wrestlers of all time. So it was. I'd probably say with the Benoit and Guerrero stuff, I knew most of what happened, but I hadn't really thought about it for a while. Seen it put together in that way, so I thought that was very well put together. I thought the Owen one as well was. Again, similar in that people know most of what happened, but I've got to say, maybe a bit embarrassing, I never really thought about it from the Owen Hart's family perspective. I just thought about it as him as the wrestler, the performer, the entertainer. And when you hear his widow talking about his wife talking about it, you get the different perspective of why he's not in the Hall of Fame.
And never will be.
No. And also, both those are really... And I suppose they sit overarching the other in terms of compared to the other episodes. Both of those are really about the sort of more murky, not sleazy, but underbelly of the business. The fact that I never really thought about it until they were saying it. The fact the show went on. So Owen Hart is dead in the ring, and the show goes on, and then they had some clips of Undertaker wrestling, clearly knowing that Owen Hart was dead, and the bit where they cut JR, and JR says, by the way, we haven't been updated. What's happened? Oh, he's dead. Anyway, you're live in 5, 4, 3. Actually, just stuff that would happen in wrestling that just doesn't happen in other fields.
I think in a totally non-perverted way, that's like the producer's eyes absolutely lit up when they got hold of that story, and Martha agreed to do it because they knew that obviously it was such a big tragedy that had never really been documented or covered before. And all this stuff is coming out about how they chose to press on with the show, knowing that someone had just died in that ring. His blood was still on the mat.
Yeah, awful.
So, like, from a documentary standpoint, like, really, really interesting to...
Absolutely. And the fallout with Vince since, subsequently, you'd think he'd want to put his arm around her and support the family, and actually he's gone the other way.
Well, yeah, I mean, she did the media rounds after that episode aired, she being Owen's wife. And is on record as saying, that obviously there was a decent settlement from WWE and Vince, but because Vince didn't want the PR. Like there was never ever going to be any justice. It was just a case of settling for however many millions of dollars that they cared to put a value on.
Yeah.
But what do you think about sort of the wider impact that both those tragedies had on wrestling with general public and people just sort of looking in from afar and seeing these people dying in such tragic circumstances?
People certainly know about it. Benoit's Benoit tragedy referred to him was headline news and main news, and the follow up and how it developed, and of course it affected how wrestling followed up in terms of the PG era. But probably probably because it's wrestling, it actually doesn't get the exposure. It gets more exposure than other stuff, but not as much exposure as if we were talking about athletes from American football or soccer or whatever. So it's probably not actually got the merit it deserves, even though it's had widespread focus.
Yeah, fair. That might change. Well, it has changed now that these documentaries have aired.
Yeah,
for sure. Okay. Any other episodes of notes? Anything you didn't like? Herb Abrams.
There's a few in the middle that I wasn't so keen on. Herb Abrams, Dino Bravo, and the Jimmy Superfly Snuka one.
Yeah, the reasons you said before, just because they're more just like crime documentaries, not necessarily linked to.
Yeah, Dino Bravo sort of didn't do one or the other. It just sort of he died in this mafia hit style way, but then it didn't really explore that. It just said, he died like this, isn't this mad? Which of course it is. But then it also didn't really intertwine with his career. I think the ones I like least, those ones, the Snuka, Herb Abrams, Bravo. There wasn't enough of an interplay between the tragedy and what was happening in wrestling. The two felt quite divorced. And then conversely, the other ones that were really good, I thought, was the New Jack and the Brawl for All, and they were really good because everything that was happening along the narrative and the chronology and the timeline and the continuum of what was going on with them in wrestling at the moment, and the talking heads that were popping up on the screen were fully immersed and involved in what was happening. So you were getting what was happening in wrestling, why it was so crazy, in terms of New Jack and the assaults that he was carrying out allegedly. And then you get the people's perspectives that were there, which I think made for a better show than the Snuka one, where they didn't really have that sort of input.
Snuka was drawn out over so many years, though, wasn't it? Like he was wrestling in late 70s, 80s, and then he's not died until 2012. So I suppose it was drawn out. But yeah, I mean, I definitely take your point. Like New Jack, everything that was worth watching about New Jack happened whilst he was still in ring.
Yes.
It was not alleged at all, is it? There's a video of him stabbing someone in the ring.
When he throws him off the top of that scaffold. That is outrageous.
Amazing that was happening at that time around like the ECW boom.
Yeah, and that's when they're really interesting. I think there's plans. They also had the Road Warriors. Actually, that was a good episode. But there's a decent documentary on the network on them. That's a couple of hours long that talks that through. But I think when they do their next series, which inevitably they now will do, I think focusing on bigger moments in more depth, almost making every episode, if there's the footage for it, the desire for it, a two-parter, but with more sustained focus, rather than picking these things up that are on the margins and aren't really like a divorced in terms of wrestling and the tragedy. Yeah,
fair. So that just leaves what, the Brawl for All?
Which was I was watching wrestling. Watching wrestling religiously. That's how I completely forgot that even happened. Obviously, really familiar with Steve Williams and Butterbean having the fight, but actually
Billy Gunn.
Sorry, Bart Gunn. Yeah. And then Williams is the one that they wanted to go over, isn't it?
Yes.
Didn't. Sorry. Yeah. Watching that, I actually had no idea. It's interesting the way Cornette and Russo talk about it as, to start with the crowds where we want wrestling, and then after a while they were like, hold on, this is actually what's going on here, and the fact that some of the legit MMA fighters pulled out, realizing that there was no way he could look any good in it. I mean, it's outrageous, really, isn't it? and you can see Cornette and Russo on that just going absolutely mad at each other. You can see how they just poles apart in terms of Russo being like, it's just wrestling, man, like whatever. Got in the ring, just wanted to teach JBL a lesson, 100 grand.
They're not kayfabing each other either. Like,
no,
that is absolutely
that's legitimate.
Yeah,
and you can see Cornette's point of view, like you screwed over 2 characters who were potentially going places and a whole host of wrestlers for some stupid tournament. You can see the venom in his eyes.
Never mind the injuries.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, exactly. Nor how that would have played out backstage with these people actually having legitimate shoot fights in the arena. So yeah, I thought that was one of my favourite episodes actually. That's fantastic. I think when the episodes are good, like we said, there's wrestling, there's the controversy, and there's the people that were in it talking about it. And I think that's when Dark Side of the Ring is really good, when it's focused like that, because you also know that it's not WWE spin.
You talk about controversy.
Indeed.
Right, on that note, we bounce out of it.
Yeah, let's tap out.
Wrestling Rebooked, putting wrestling into submission. Until next time.